The wedding dress clung to Grace Thompson's trembling body like a shroud of broken dreams. Lightning split the October Seattle sky as she sat on the cold metal bench at the bus stop, mascara painting dark rivers down her cheeks, her veil a tangled mess of lace and shattered promises. 45 minutes ago, she was walking down the aisle of St. Catherine's Cathedral, her heart racing with joy as 200 guests turned to watch her approach the altar. 45 minutes ago, Ethan Caldwell had been waiting for her in his designer tuxedo. 45 minutes ago, Grace had believed in fairy tales. Now, the thunder overhead seemed to mock her with its violence, each crash echoing her imploding world. "You cannot possibly think this is acceptable." Margaret Caldwell's voice still rang in her ears like poison. The woman had cornered Grace in the bridal suite just as she was about to make her grand entrance. Her perfectly manicured claws gripping a manila folder. "My son deserves better than a pediatric nurse drowning in student debt." Grace had tried to speak, to defend herself, but Margaret had been relentless. $47,000 in loans, Grace. A one-bedroom apartment in Capitol Hill. A 15-year-old Honda Civic. Each word had been delivered like a surgical strike. Did you really think Ethan would throw away his inheritance for someone so ordinary? The folder had contained copies of Grace's financial records, her employment history, even photos of her modest apartment. How long had they been investigating her? How long had Ethan known? "He's waiting for you to do the right thing," Margaret had said, checking her Cartier watch with theatrical impatience. "Walk away now, and we'll pay off your student loans. Stay, and you'll destroy his future." Grace had stood there in her grandmother's vintage pearl necklace, and her carefully saved, for dress, feeling smaller with each passing second. But it was the look in Ethan's eyes when she'd finally reached the altar that had shattered her completely. Not love, not even regret, just relief. "I can't do this," he had whispered, loud enough for the front rows to hear. "I'm sorry, Grace. I thought I could, but I can't." The gasps from the congregation still echoed in her memory as she turned and ran, her silk train catching on the cathedral steps, her bouquet of white roses scattered like fallen snow. Now, she sat in the downpour. Her phone dead. Her purse left behind in the bridal suite. With nowhere to go. Her apartment lease had expired 2 weeks ago. She'd moved in with Ethan, believing they were building a life together. Her job at Seattle Children's Hospital had been temporarily covered while she took her wedding week off. Everything she owned was in boxes at Ethan's penthouse, the same penthouse she could never return to. Grace pulled her ruined veil tighter around her shoulders, though it provided no warmth. Her grandmother's pearl necklace, the something old that was supposed to bring her luck, felt heavy against her throat. She had never felt so alone in her life. A car door slammed somewhere behind her, followed by the sound of expensive leather shoes splashing through puddles. Grace didn't look up. She couldn't bear to see another person's pity. "Excuse me." The voice was deep, gentle, with just a hint of a Spanish accent. "Are you all right?" Grace finally raised her head, and her breath caught. The man standing before her was tall and broad-shouldered, his dark hair slicked back by rain, his charcoal suit somehow managing to look elegant, despite being soaked. But it was his eyes that made her pulse quick and warm brown, filled with genuine concern. "I'm fine," she lied, her voice barely audible over the thunder. Javier Morales had been driving home from another tedious tech board meeting when he'd spotted the figure in white at the bus stop. At first, he'd assumed it was some kind of art installation who sat in a wedding dress during a downpour, but as his Bentley had drawn closer, he'd seen the way her shoulders shook, the absolute devastation written in every line of her posture. He should have kept driving. Javier had learned the hard way that beautiful women in distress usually came with complications he couldn't afford. Sophia was his priority now, his reason for living, and he'd sworn never to let another gold digger near his 8-year-old daughter. But something about this woman's grief had pierced through his carefully constructed walls. Maybe it was the way she held herself, proud even in her despair. Maybe it was how she turned her face away from his headlights, as if she couldn't bear to be seen. Or maybe it was simply that no one should be alone in weather like this. "Forgive me, but you don't look fine," he said gently, pulling off his suit jacket despite the rain. "May I?" He gestured toward the bench beside her. Grace studied his face, searching for the predatory gleam she'd learned to recognize in men who saw vulnerability as opportunity. Instead, she found only kindness and something that looked like understanding. "I don't take charity," she said, lifting her chin with what little dignity she had left. "Good," Javier replied, settling beside her on the bench. "I wasn't offering any." He draped his jacket around her shoulders anyway, and she was too cold and too broken to protest. "I'm offering conversation to a fellow survivor." Despite everything, Grace felt her lips twitch toward a smile. "Survivor? I have it on good authority that we're supposed to get 6 inches of rain tonight. Anyone brave enough to face that deserves respect." His eyes studied her face with an intensity that should have made her uncomfortable but somehow didn't, though I'm guessing this particular storm isn't entirely meteorological. Grace's composure cracked. "I gave up everything for him," she whispered, the words tumbling out like a confession. "My apartment, my independence, my pride. I thought love was supposed to be enough." Javier felt something twist in his chest. He recognized that particular brand of devastation, the hollow ache that came from believing in someone who didn't deserve it. "Love should be enough," he said quietly, "when it's real." "How do you tell the difference?" Grace asked, her green eyes searching his face. "How do you know when it's real?" "Real love doesn't come with conditions," Javier said, thinking of Isabella, of Sophia, of the kind of love that would move mountains rather than demand you change who you are. "Real love doesn't make you smaller." A fresh wave of tears spilled down Grace's cheeks. "I feel invisible, like I never mattered at all." Javier turned to face her fully, and when he spoke, his voice carried absolute conviction. "You matter. I can see that, and I don't even know your name." "Grace," she said softly. "Grace Thompson." "Javier Morales," he offered his hand, and when she took it, he felt a jolt of electricity. "And Grace, whoever he is, he's an idiot." For the first time in hours, Grace let out a broken, watery sound, but genuine. "Thank you." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the rain turn the city into an impressionist painting. Javier found himself studying her profile, the elegant line of her neck, the way she bit her lower lip when she was thinking. She was beautiful, yes, but more than that, there was something luminous about her. A strength that hadn't been broken despite everything. "I should let you get home," Grace said finally, starting to shrug off his jacket. "Your family will be worried." "Just my daughter," Javier said, making no move to take the jacket back. "And she's safe with our housekeeper tonight." He paused, weighing his next words carefully. "But you're not safe here, not in this weather." Grace stiffened. "I told you. I don't take charity." "I heard you." Javier stood and extended his hand again. "But you're a pediatric nurse, right? I saw your ID badge. So you know that sometimes accepting help isn't about charity. It's about survival. And right now, you need somewhere warm and dry to figure out your next move." Grace stared at his outstretched hand, torn between pride and desperation. Every instinct screamed at her not to trust a stranger, no matter how kind his eyes or how gentle his voice. But the alternative was spending the night in the downpour with nowhere to go and no way to contact anyone. "Why would you help me?" she asked. Javier considered the question seriously. "Because everyone deserves a chance to start over. Because storms end, but only if you survive them first." He paused, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "And because I have a feeling that helping you might save me too." The sincerity in his words broke through her final resistance. Grace placed her hand in his and let him pull her to her feet. As they walked toward his car, lightning illuminated the sky once more, and Grace couldn't help but think that this storm had taken everything from her, but maybe, just maybe, it was about to give her something back. Chapter 2. Sanctuary and Suspicion, the Four Seasons. Seattle lobby gleamed against the storm-darkened night marble and crystal and understated elegance that made Grace's waterlogged wedding dress feel like a costume from a tragic opera. She stood dripping on Persian rugs, acutely aware of the sympathetic glances from the immaculately dressed staff. "Mr. Morales," the concierge greeted Javier with warm familiarity. "How wonderful to see you again." "Thank you, Roberto." Javier's hand found the small of Grace's back, a gesture both protective and steadying. "We'll need your finest available suite." Grace's pride flared to life. "The smallest room will be fine," she interrupted, her voice carrying more strength than she felt. "I'll pay you back for everything, Mr. Morales, every penny. I know you will." The elevator climbed silently toward the top floor. "Tell me, do you make financial decisions for your patients' families when they are in crisis?" The question caught her off guard. "What? No, of course not, but that's different." "Is it?" Javier turned to face her fully, and in the intimate confines of the elevator, Grace became hyper-aware of his presence. When someone is in shock, traumatized, vulnerable, do you let them make decisions that might harm them? Grace opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. He was right, and they both knew it. "That's different," she said again, but with less conviction. "Is it really?" The elevator chimed softly as they reached the penthouse level. "Grace, you're soaking wet. You have no phone, no purse, nowhere to go. And you've just survived a traumatic public humiliation. If one of your patient's mothers came to you in this condition, what would you tell her?" The doors opened to reveal a private hallway with only one set of double doors. Grace stepped out slowly. "I'd tell her to accept help," she admitted quietly. "Smart woman." Javier's smile was gentle as he used his key card to open the suite doors. "Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is let someone take care of us." The penthouse suite was breathtaking floor-to-ceiling windows, offered a panoramic view of Elliott Bay, where lightning still danced across the water. The furnishings were elegant cream leather sofas, warm wood accents, fresh orchids but it was the photograph on the side table that caught Grace's attention. A beautiful Latina woman with laughing dark eyes held a gap-toothed little girl with Javier's warm brown eyes and her mother's radiant smile. All three were covered in flour, clearly in the middle of some baking adventure, and the love between them was palpable. "Your family?" she asked softly. Javier followed her gaze, and his expression shifted, becoming distant. "My late wife, Isabella, and our daughter, Sophia. That was taken about 6 months before Isabella died." "I'm sorry." Grace turned away from the photo, feeling like an intruder. "You must miss her terribly." "Every day." Javier moved to the windows, his reflection ghost-like against the storm outside. She was everything good in the world kind, funny, brilliant. She could light up a room just by walking into it. Grace heard the love in his voice, the grief that time hadn't quite healed. "She was beautiful," Grace said genuinely. She was, inside and out. Javier turned back to her, and his expression softened. "But beauty isn't rare, Grace. Authenticity is. Kindness is. Strength in the face of adversity is." Before Grace could respond, a discreet knock interrupted them. Room service arrived with a silver tea service and delicate china. The server set everything up with silent professionalism, then disappeared. "You should get out of those wet clothes," Javier said, his voice carefully neutral. "There's a robe in the bedroom, and I can have the concierge arrange for something dry to wear tomorrow." Grace looked down at her ruined wedding dress. "I look ridiculous, don't I?" "You look like a woman who's been through hell and is still standing." Javier poured tea into delicate cups. "That's not ridiculous. That's remarkable." Grace accepted the cup gratefully, wrapping her hands around its warmth. "You don't know me, Javier. For all you know, I could be exactly what Ethan's mother said I was, a gold digger, a social climber, looking for someone to pay my bills." Javier studied her over his own teacup. "Are you?" "No." The answer came out fierce and immediate. "I work 60-hour weeks at the Children's Hospital. I chose pediatric nursing because I wanted to help kids, not because it was lucrative. I've never even dated anyone wealthy before, Ethan, and that was—" She trailed off, realizing how naive she sounded. "That was what?" Grace set down her cup with shaking hands. "An accident. We met at a charity auction for the hospital. I was there representing our unit, and he was charming, attentive. He made me feel special." She laughed bitterly. "God, I sound like such a cliché. You sound like someone who believed the best in someone who didn't deserve it." Javier leaned forward, studying her intently. "Tell me about your work, about the children you help." Grace's face transformed when she talked about her patients. The light came back into her green eyes, her posture straightened, and her voice filled with passion. She told him about Liam, the 6-year-old with leukemia who drew her pictures of superheroes, about tiny Ava, born 3 months premature, who was now a thriving toddler, about the families she'd held together through the worst moments of their lives. Javier found himself captivated, not just by her stories, but by the woman telling them. Here was someone who had chosen a profession based on love rather than profit, who worked herself to exhaustion caring for others, who found joy in a child's smile. "Why pediatric nursing?" he asked when she paused to sip her tea. "My little brother." Grace's voice grew soft with memory. "Tommy. He was born with a heart defect, spent most of his childhood in and out of hospitals. There was this one nurse, Miss Ellen, who made everything bearable. She turned shots into superhero vaccines and bandage changes into warrior armor fittings. She made Tommy feel brave when he was terrified." Grace smiled. "I wanted to be that for other kids, to be the person who makes the scary things less scary." "What happened to Tommy?" "He's fine, now healthy, married, working as a firefighter in Portland. He credits Miss Ellen with saving his life, but I think she saved more than that. She saved his spirit." Javier felt something shift in his chest, a recognition of kindred spirits. Sophia was in the NICU for 3 weeks when she was born premature. Respiratory distress. The nurses there, they were angels. I don't know how we would have survived without them. Grace leaned forward, her professional instincts engaging. "She's okay now?" "Perfect. Healthy. Brilliant. Stubborn as hell." Javier's face lit up when he talked about his daughter. "She's 8 now, and she has opinions about everything, especially about the women who occasionally try to date her father. I imagine she's protective of you." "Fiercely. We've been through 3 nannies in the past year because Sophia has a talent for spotting fortune hunters from a mile away." Javier's expression grew serious. "She's had to grow up too fast. Learn to guard herself against people who might use her to get to me. It's not fair to her, but after Isabella died, you had to protect what was left of your family." "Exactly." Javier set down his cup and looked at her directly. "Which is why I need you to understand something, Grace. I didn't bring you here because I'm looking for anything romantic. I'm not trying to seduce you or take advantage of your vulnerability. I brought you here because you needed help, and I was in a position to provide it. Nothing more." The words should have been reassuring. Instead, Grace felt an unexpected stab of disappointment that she quickly suppressed. Of course, he wasn't interested in her romantically. He was clearly still in love with his late wife, and she was just a bedraggled stranger he'd taken pity on. "I understand," she said, proud that her voice remained steady. "And I appreciate your honesty, your kindness." But as she stood to go change out of her ruined dress, Javier's voice stopped her. "Grace." She turned back to find him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "Ethan Caldwell is the biggest fool I've ever heard of, and his mother, she's wrong about you. Completely. Utterly wrong." Grace felt tears threaten again, but these were different from the ones she'd shed in the storm. These were warm, healing tears that came from being seen and valued by someone who had no reason to lie to her. "Thank you," she whispered as she disappeared into the bedroom to change. Javier remained by the windows, watching lightning illuminate the bay. He'd meant every word he'd said about not having romantic intentions. After Isabella, he'd sworn never to risk his heart again, never to put Sophia through the potential pain of losing another mother figure. But as he listened to Grace moving around in the next room, as he thought about the passion in her voice when she talked about her work and the strength she'd shown in the face of betrayal, Javier found himself wondering if some promises were meant to be broken. In the bedroom, Grace caught sight of herself in the full-length mirror and almost didn't recognize the woman staring back. Her wedding dress was a ruin of silk and dreams, her makeup smeared beyond repair, her hair a tangled mess. But her Aisha eyes looked different. Still hurt, yes, but no longer hollow. For the first time in hours, Grace Thompson looked like a woman with possibilities instead of just problems. And that, she thought as she carefully hung up the remnants of her wedding dress, was a start. Chapter 3. Background Check and Boundaries. 3 days later, Grace Thompson sat in the hotel's business center, scrolling through job listings with increasing desperation. The complimentary hotel robe had been replaced by a simple black dress that Javier had insisted on providing. and her hair was pulled back in a professional bun that couldn't quite hide the fact that her entire life had imploded. Her phone buzzed with another rejection email. "Thank you for your interest, but we filled the position." She'd been through 12 job applications in 2 days, and every response was the same polite dismissal. Rough morning? Grace looked up to find Javier approaching with 2 steaming coffee cups. He'd traded his expensive suits for dark jeans and a charcoal sweater that somehow made him look even more attractive. "The 12th rejection," she said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "I'm starting to think Ethan's family has more reach than I realized." Javier pulled up her email on the laptop screen, showing him the string of rejections. "Look at the timing. I submitted these applications Monday night and Tuesday morning. Every single response came back within hours, not the typical week or 2 for review. And several of these hospitals specifically mentioned that they were no longer considering candidates with questionable professional associations. Son of a..." Javier's voice was quiet, but Grace caught the steel beneath it. "They're sabotaging you." "It appears so. Margaret Caldwell has connections throughout Seattle's medical community. Her family foundation donates generously to most of the major hospitals." She laughed bitterly. "I should have seen this coming." Javier studied her face, the determined set of her jaw, the way she held her shoulders straight despite the obvious defeat. Most people in her situation would be broken by now, maybe even desperate enough to go crawling back to their ex-fiancé. But Grace Thompson just looked angry, and anger was so much better than despair. "Have you considered looking outside Seattle?" he asked carefully. "With what money?" "I have enough savings for maybe 2 weeks, and that's only because you've been covering my expenses." Grace met his eyes directly, refusing to look away despite the embarrassment. "I'm keeping track of everything, Javier. I will pay you back." "I know you will." He paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. "Grace, I have a proposition for you." She stiffened immediately. "Javier, we talked about this. Not that kind of proposition." His voice was gentle but firm. "A job offer." Grace blinked. "A job offer?" "Sophia's nanny quit last week, gave notice via text message because apparently my daughter asked too many personal questions and made her uncomfortable with her attitude." Javier's tone suggested he was rather proud of Sophia's screening abilities. "I need someone to watch her while I work, someone who can handle a precocious 8-year-old with boundary issues and a talent for detecting insincerity." "Javier." Grace shook her head slowly. "I can't accept charity disguised as employment. It's not charity. It's a legitimate job offer for someone uniquely qualified." Javier leaned forward, his intensity making her pulse quicken. "You're a pediatric nurse, Grace. You understand children in crisis. You know how to handle medical emergencies, and you've already proven you can think on your feet under pressure." He paused, his voice growing softer. "Plus, Sophia could use someone who understands what it's like to have your world turned upside down." Despite herself, Grace felt intrigued. "What happened to the other nannies?" Javier's expression grew rueful. "The first one spent more time taking selfies for her Instagram than actually watching Sophia. Sophia may have accidentally mentioned that the woman was more interested in my bank account than her well-being." "Accidentally?" "Sophia's accidents tend to be remarkably well-timed and accurate." Javier smiled, and Grace caught a glimpse of the proud father beneath the careful businessman. "The second nanny lasted 3 weeks before Sophia convinced her that our house was haunted by staging several elaborate supernatural events." Grace couldn't help but laugh. "And the third? Made it almost 2 months. Sophia actually liked her, which should have been my first clue that something was wrong." Javier's expression hardened. "Turns out she was selling information about our family to a gossip blogger. Sophia caught her photographing my private office. Smart kid. Too smart for her own good sometimes." Javier reached across the table, his fingers just barely brushing Grace's hand. "The thing is, Grace, Sophia needs someone genuine. Someone who's there for her, not for what being there might get them. Someone who understands that trust is earned, not assumed." Grace stared down at their almost touching hands, hyper-aware of the warmth radiating from his skin. "Javier, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not qualified to be a nanny. I work in a hospital setting with protocols and backup staff. Being solely responsible for a child in a home environment is completely different." which is why this would be a trial, period 2 weeks, live in position, in the guest house on our property. You'd have your own space, your own entrance, complete privacy. Javier's voice grew businesslike, professional. Sophia's in school most of the day, so your responsibilities would be picking her up, helping with homework, preparing dinner, and staying with her when I have evening meetings or travel. What's the catch? Grace asked. Because in her experience, opportunities that seemed too good to be true usually were. The catch is Sophia herself. Javier pulled out his phone and showed Grace a picture of a beautiful little girl with her father's warm brown eyes and her mother's delicate features. She's brilliant, curious, and completely unimpressed by adults who try to win her over with gifts or false enthusiasm. She's also dealing with grief, abandonment issues, and a healthy suspicion of anyone who shows interest in her father. Grace studied the photo. Sophia was laughing in the picture, covered in what looked like finger paint, her hair in pigtails that had clearly seen better days. But it was her eyes that caught Grace's attention, bright with intelligence, but guarded in a way that number 8-year-old's eyes should be. She's been through a lot, Grace said softly. More than any child should have to. Javier tucked the phone away, his voice heavy with guilt. Isabella died in a car accident 2 years ago. Sophia was with her. Grace's breath caught. Oh, Javier. Sophia was in the back seat when it happened. Physically, she was fine. Isabella had insisted on the safest car seat money could buy, made sure Sophia was properly secured. But emotionally, Javier ran a hand through his hair, suddenly looking exhausted. She didn't speak for 3 months after the funeral. When she finally started talking again, she'd changed, more serious, more careful about who she trusts. Trauma responses in children often manifest as hypervigilance, Grace said, her professional training kicking in. She's protecting herself the only way she knows how. Exactly. Which is why she needs someone who won't push too hard, won't try to force a relationship, won't take her wariness personally. Javier met Grace's eyes directly. Someone who understands that healing takes time and can't be rushed. Grace felt something shift in her chest, a recognition of kindred spirits across generations. She thought of her own childhood, of the hospitals and the fear, of Miss Ellen, who had never tried to force comfort but had simply been present, reliable, genuine. The salary? She asked, already knowing she was going to say yes. $60,000 a year, plus room and board, health insurance, dental, vision, 2 weeks paid vacation, personal days as needed. Javier's terms were more than generous, they were transformative. And Grace, the background check goes both ways. I'll have my security team verify your credentials and history, but you're welcome to do the same with me. I want you to feel safe accepting this position. Grace almost laughed at the absurdity of running a background check on one of Seattle's most prominent tech billionaires. But she appreciated the gesture. When would you need an answer? Take your time, but if you're interested, Sophia gets out of school at 3:15 today. You could meet her, see how you two get along. Javier's smile was carefully neutral, but Grace caught the hint of nervousness beneath it. Fair warning, though she's likely to interview you more thoroughly than I have. Grace thought about her empty email inbox, her dwindling bank account, the future that had stretched out so promisingly just days ago and now seemed like a void. Then she thought about the little girl in the photo, guarded and grieving but still capable of paint-covered laughter. I'd like to meet her, Grace said finally. Javier's smile was radiant. Excellent. I'll pick you up at 2:30. As he stood to leave, Grace caught his arm gently. Javier, thank you for everything. I know you don't owe me anything, and this opportunity, it means more than you know. Javier looked down at her hand on his arm, at the elegant fingers that had probably held countless children through their worst moments. When he met her eyes again, his expression was soft with something that looked dangerously like tenderness. Grace, he said quietly, something tells me that if anyone's doing anyone a favor here, it's you doing one for us. After he left, Grace sat alone in the business center, staring at her reflection in the laptop screen. 3 days ago, she'd been preparing to marry a man who'd seen her as a liability. Now, she was considering taking care of the child of a man who seemed to see her as a solution. The difference was staggering. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Sophia. Dad says you might be my new nanny. I have questions. Be prepared. Grace stared at the message, somewhere between amused and terrified. An 8-year-old with her own phone who conducted interviews? Javier hadn't been exaggerating about Sophia's precocity. She typed back, "Looking forward to meeting you, Sophia. I have questions too." The response came immediately. "Good. I don't trust adults who don't ask questions. See you at 3:15. P.S. Dad likes you. He gets this weird look when he talks about you. Thought you should know." Grace nearly dropped her phone. A matchmaking 8-year-old with a protective streak and no filter, this job was going to be far more complicated than she'd anticipated. But as she headed back to her hotel room to prepare for what would undoubtedly be the most important interview of her life, Grace found herself smiling for the first time in days. Sophia sounded like exactly the kind of challenge she needed: honest, intelligent, and completely unimpressed by pretense. After a lifetime of people who disappointed her, maybe it was time to meet someone who would demand the very best of who she could be. 3 hours later, Grace stood outside Whitmore Elementary School, wearing her carefully chosen outfit of dark jeans and a soft blue sweater, clutching a small gift bag, and trying to calm her racing heart. Javier waited beside her, and she was acutely aware of how they must look to the other parents like a couple picking up their child from school. The thought sent an unexpected flutter through her stomach. "Nervous?" Javier asked, studying her face with those too perceptive eyes. "Terrified," Grace admitted. "What if she doesn't like me? Then we'll know within the first 5 minutes, and you'll be back at the hotel by 4. Javier's tone was gentle but honest. Sophia doesn't waste time with politeness when she's made up her mind about someone. The school doors opened, and children began streaming out in a chaos of backpacks and excited chatter. Grace scanned the crowd, looking for the girl from the photograph, and found her almost immediately. Sophia Morales stood apart from the other children, her dark hair in a neat braid. Her school uniform pristine, despite it being the end of the day. She was scanning the crowd, and when her eyes landed on Grace, she went completely still. For a moment, the two just stared at each other across the playground, the wounded woman and the grieving child. Both wary, both hoping, both afraid to trust. Then Sophia walked over with careful steps. "You're Grace," she said without preamble. "You're Sophia. You're different than I expected." Sophia's assessment was matter of fact. "That said, you're a nurse. Pediatric nurse. I work with sick children. Sometimes children who are scared or hurt or just need someone to take care of them for a while." Sophia considered this seriously. "Do they get better?" Grace knelt down so she was at Sophia's eye level. "Most of them do. Some need more time and help than others. But yes, most of them get better." "What's in the bag?" Grace held out the small gift bag. "Something I thought you might like, but you don't have to keep it if you don't want to." Sophia opened the bag carefully and pulled out a small leather-bound journal with a pen attached. Her eyes widened slightly. "It's for writing down your thoughts," Grace explained. "Sometimes it helps to write things down when you're feeling confused or sad or happy, like a diary, or whatever you want it to be." Sophia clutched the journal, and for the first time, her carefully composed expression softened. "Thank you." "You're welcome." Sophia looked from Grace to her father and back again. "Can Grace come see our house? I want to show her my room." Javier met Grace's eyes over his daughter's head, and the warmth in his gaze made her breath catch. "I think that's a wonderful idea," he said softly. As they walked toward Javier's car, Sophia slipped her small hand into Grace's, and Grace felt something tight in her chest finally begin to loosen. Maybe, just maybe, they were all exactly what each other needed. Chapter 4. Sophia's Walls. The guest house sat like a jewel box on Javier's estate, connected to the main residence by a winding stone path lined with Japanese maples. Grace stood in the doorway with her single suitcase and tried to process that this charming cottage was to be her home. "It's not much," Javier said from behind her, and Grace turned to stare at him in disbelief. "Not much?" The guest house was larger than her old apartment, with vaulted ceilings, a stone fireplace, and windows that overlooked the sound. "Javier, this is beautiful. Mom used to paint here sometimes," Sophia said quietly, standing between them with her new journal. She said the light was good. Grace felt the weight of that revelation. She was being given sanctuary in Isabella's private retreat. The honor felt simultaneously precious and terrifying. "Are you sure about this?" Grace asked Javier softly. "I could find somewhere else." "Mom would have liked you," Sophia interrupted. Her voice serious but her eyes carefully studying Grace's reaction. "She always said nice people helped others feel better." Javier's intake of breath was barely audible, but Grace caught it. This was Sophia's first real endorsement of any woman since her mother's death. "Thank you, Sophia," Grace said simply. "That means a lot to me." Sophia nodded once, then turned to her father. "Dad, can Grace come to dinner? Mrs. Garcia made empanadas." "If Grace would like to," Javier said, his voice carefully neutral despite the hope in his dark eyes. Grace was about to accept when Sophia's expression suddenly changed, closing off. "Unless you have somewhere better to be," Sophia added, her tone turning cool and testing. Grace recognized it immediately. The other nannies always did. This was the first real test. Sophia was preparing herself for disappointment, expecting to be let down. Grace knelt down to Sophia's eye level. "Sophia, I don't have anywhere better to be than having dinner with you and your father. In fact, I can't think of anything I'd rather do tonight." "Really?" Sophia's voice carried the skepticism of a child who'd learned to question adult promises. "Really. But I need to ask you something important." Grace waited until Sophia nodded. "If I'm going to be your nanny, you can always tell me the truth about how you're feeling if you don't want me around, if you need space. If I do something that makes you uncomfortable, you can tell me. I won't get angry, and I won't leave because you're honest with me." Sophia studied Grace's face. "The last nanny said that too, but when I told her that her perfume made me think of the hospital, she got mad and told Dad I was being difficult." "What happened at the hospital, Sophia?" "That's where they took Mom after the accident. Everything smelled like that perfume." Sophia's voice remained steady, but her knuckles were white where she gripped the journal. "I told the nanny it made me remember things I didn't want to remember, and she said I was being dramatic." Javier made a sound like he'd been punched, but Sophia wasn't looking at her father. She was watching Grace. "Sophia, that perfume should have been put away the moment you said it bothered you," Grace said firmly. "Your feelings are completely valid, and any adult who dismissed them was wrong." She paused. "Do I smell like anything that bothers you?" Sophia leaned forward slightly, taking a small sniff. "You smell like vanilla. It's nice." "Good. And if that ever changes, you tell me immediately. Deal?" "Deal." Sophia's posture relaxed slightly. "Can we eat now?" "Mrs. Garcia gets worried when dinner gets cold." Dinner in the Morales household was a revelation. The formal dining room Grace had expected was replaced by a cozy breakfast nook overlooking the garden, where Javier and Sophia clearly shared their evening meals. Mrs. Garcia, a warm-hearted woman in her 60s, served homemade empanadas with obvious pride. "Miss Grace," Mrs. Garcia said as she set down a plate of the golden pastries. "Mr. Javier tells me you're a nurse." "Pediatric nurse at Seattle Children's," Grace confirmed. "Ah, good. Sophia, you show Miss Grace your scar from when you fell off your bike last month." Sophia immediately rolled up her sleeve to display a thin white line on her forearm. "Needed 6 stitches, she announced proudly. Dad almost fainted when he saw the blood. "I did not almost faint," Javier protested, but his ears reddened slightly. "I was concerned about infection risk." He turned green. Sophia confided to Grace. "Mrs. Garcia had to make him sit down." Grace examined the scar professionally. "Nice work on the stitches-clean edges, minimal scarring." "You were brave." "How do you know it was good work?" Sophia asked, genuinely curious. "I've seen a lot of stitches. Part of my job is helping doctors treat children who've been hurt." Grace traced the air above Sophia's scar without touching it. "The doctor who did this took time to make sure you'd heal well." Sophia beamed at the praise, and Javier watched his daughter bask in Grace's professional approval. "Tell Grace about your school project," Javier suggested. Sophia's face lit up. "We're doing presentations on heroes, real heroes, not superheroes. I'm doing mine on Mom." Grace smiled. "That sounds wonderful. What kind of hero was your mom?" She was a teacher before I was born, and she used to volunteer at the literacy center downtown every Saturday. She taught people who never learned to read when they were kids. Sophia's voice grew animated. Dad has videos of her reading stories to groups of adults, and they all looked so happy when they could finally read the words themselves. That's beautiful, Grace said, and meant it. Being able to read opens up the whole world. That's what Mom used to say. She said books were like doors to everywhere you'd ever want to go. Sophia paused, her expression growing more serious. Dad, can I show Grace the video? The one where Mom is teaching Mr. Peterson to read? Javier hesitated for just a moment. Sharing Isabella's memory with Grace felt like crossing another invisible line, but Sophia's hopeful expression decided him. Of course, mija. They moved to the family room after dinner, a comfortable space filled with books and family photos. Sophia curled up between Grace and Javier on the sectional sofa, tablet in hand, as she navigated to her father's carefully curated collection of Isabella's videos. The woman who appeared on screen was luminous, all warm smiles and patient encouragement as she worked with a gray-haired man who was struggling to sound out simple words. Grace could see where Sophia had inherited her father's eyes and her mother's spirit. She's beautiful, Grace said softly, and look how proud Mr. Peterson is when he gets that sentence right. Mom cried happy tears that day, Sophia said, leaning unconsciously against Grace's side. She said it was the best day ever because Mr. Peterson could finally read letters from his grandchildren. Grace felt tears prick her own eyes as she watched Isabella Morales celebrate her student's victory with pure, selfless joy. This was a woman who had found purpose in lifting others up. Your mom was definitely a hero, Grace told Sophia, the kind who made the world better just by being in it. Sophia nodded solemnly, then surprised Grace by asking, "What about you? Are you a hero?" Grace laughed softly. "I'm just someone who tries to help when I can." "That's what heroes do," Sophia said with 8-year-old logic. "They help when they can." Javier watched this exchange with something close to wonder. Sophia hadn't shared Isabella's videos with anyone outside the family since the funeral, yet here she was, not only showing them to Grace but asking for her opinion, seeking her validation. "Sophia, it's getting late," he said gently. "Time to get ready for bed." "Can Grace read me a story?" Sophia asked, then quickly backtracked when she saw her father's expression. "I mean, if she wants to. She doesn't have to." Grace felt Javier's eyes on her, felt the weight of yet another test, another opportunity to prove herself worthy of Sophia's fragile trust. "I'd love to read you a story," she said. "What's your favorite book?" Sophia bounced off the couch and returned with a well-worn copy of Charlotte's Web. "Mom used to read this to me. We never finished it because—" She trailed off, the unfinished sentence hanging heavy in the air. "Would you like to start from the beginning or from where you and your mom left off?" Grace asked carefully. Sophia considered this seriously. "From where we left off." Chapter 12. Mom always said you shouldn't start a story over just because something changes. They settled in Sophia's bedroom, a perfect little girl's room in shades of purple and white, with photos of Isabella scattered throughout like gentle guardians. Grace began reading from chapter 12, and Sophia curled up under her covers, listening with focused attention. Javier listened from the doorway, transfixed by the sight of Grace reading to his daughter in the same cadence Isabella had used, with the same gentle warmth that had made bedtime stories feel like the most important part of the day. When Sophia's breathing grew deep and even, Grace carefully marked their place in the book and set it on the nightstand. She was preparing to tiptoe out when Sophia's sleepy voice stopped her. "Grace? Yes, sweetheart? Will you be here tomorrow?" The question was asked with such careful casualness that Grace's heart ached. This was the real test, not whether she could read stories or praise good doctoring, but whether she would still be there when Sophia woke up. "I'll be here tomorrow," Grace promised, "and the day after that, and the day after that, for as long as you want me to be." Sophia smiled sleepily. "Good. I like having you here." Grace smoothed the covers over Sophia's small form and whispered, "I like being here too." Javier was waiting in the hallway when she emerged, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "She usually takes weeks to warm up to new people," he said quietly as they walked downstairs together. "She's been through a lot. Trust is precious when you've lost it before." Grace paused at the bottom of the stairs, suddenly aware that they were alone together for the first time since that night in the hotel. "Javier, about earlier, when she shared the video, it was fine," he said quickly. "More than fine. It was—" She needed to share that with someone who would understand how special Isabella was. She was special. Anyone could see that. Grace met his eyes directly. "And Sophia is special too. You've raised an incredible little girl." "We raised her," Javier corrected softly. "Isabella and I together. Now it's just me, and I'm terrified I'm going to mess it up." The vulnerability in his admission made Grace's chest tight. "Javier, you're not going to mess it up. Sofia adores you. She feels safe with you, protected, loved. That's everything. Is it enough, though? Can love really be enough when there are so many things I can't give her?" Javier ran a hand through his hair, suddenly looking exhausted. "I can't give her a mother. I can't give her the family Isabella dreamed we'd have together." Grace stepped closer without thinking, drawn by his pain and her own desperate need to comfort him. "Javier, you're giving her the most important thing any parent can give, a child the absolute certainty that she is loved unconditionally. Everything else is just details." "You really believe that?" "I know it. I've seen too many children who had everything money could buy, but no real love. And I've seen children who had nothing but love and somehow turned out okay." Grace paused, then added softly, "Sophia knows she was loved by her mother, and she knows she's loved by you. That's not a foundation that breaks easily." Javier looked down at her then, really looked at her, and Grace saw something shift in his expression, a recognition, perhaps, or a decision being made. "Grace," he said quietly, "thank you for tonight, for the way you were with Sophia, for understanding what she needed. She's easy to understand once you realize she just wants to be heard and respected, like her mother." Javier said with a soft smile. "Isabella always said the secret to connecting with people was to listen more than you talked and to never dismiss someone's feelings, no matter how young they were. Smart woman. The smartest." Javier's eyes crinkled slightly. "She would have liked you, you know. Isabella always said she could tell within 5 minutes whether someone had a good heart." Grace felt warmth bloom in her chest at the compliment. "What's the verdict?" Javier stepped closer, close enough that Grace could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, close enough to catch the faint scent of his cologne. "I think," he said softly, "that Isabella would have been absolutely right about you." For a moment, they stood there in the soft light of the foyer, something electric and unspoken stretching between them. Grace was acutely aware of how easy it would be to reach out and touch him, to close the distance that felt both vast and insignificant. Then Javier stepped back, professional distance reasserting itself, and the moment passed. "You should get some rest," he said. "Sophia will probably wake up early. She's excited to show you around the estate tomorrow." "Of course. Good night, Javier." "Good night, Grace." As Grace walked the moonlit path back to the guest house, she could feel Javier watching her from the window. When she turned back at her door, he was still there, silhouetted against the warm light of his home. She waved, and he waved back, and something about the simple gesture felt like a promise neither of them was quite ready to make. Inside the guest house, Grace prepared for bed in Isabella's sanctuary, surrounded by the ghost of another woman's happiness. But instead of feeling like an intruder, she felt oddly peaceful, as if she'd been welcomed into something sacred and beautiful. As she drifted off to sleep, Grace thought about Sophia's question. "Are you a hero?" Maybe heroes weren't just the people who saved lives or changed the world. Maybe heroes were also the people who showed up when someone needed them, who listened when someone needed to be heard, who stayed when someone needed them to stay. If that was true, then Grace Thompson was ready to be Sophia's hero. And maybe, just maybe, she was ready to let Javier Morales be hers. Chapter 5. Ghosts and Growing. Trust Grace woke to the sound of small fists pounding on her front door, and Sophia's voice calling her name with barely contained panic. She stumbled out of bed, still wearing the oversized t-shirt she'd slept in, and yanked open the door to find Sophia standing on the doorstep in her pajamas, tears streaming down her face. "Sophia, sweetheart, what's wrong?" Grace immediately pulled the little girl into her arms, checking for obvious injuries. "I had the dream again. Sophia sobbed against Grace's shoulder. The bad one. And Mrs. Garcia had to go home because her grandson got sick, and I was scared to wake up Dad because he was so tired from his meetings. Grace felt Sophia's small body trembling against her. She'd seen this before: night terrors, trauma responses, the way grief could ambush a child when they least expected it. "Okay, baby. You're safe now," Grace murmured, carrying Sophia inside and settling them both on the couch. "Tell me about the dream." Sophia hiccuped against Grace's chest. "It's always the same. I'm in the car with Mom, and she's singing, and then there's this loud noise, and everything goes dark. But in the dream, I can't find her after. I keep calling for her, but she doesn't answer." Grace rubbed soothing circles on Sophia's back. "Oh, sweetheart, that sounds so scary. The doctor said the dreams would go away, but it's been 2 years, Grace. Why won't they go away?" Sophia's voice was small and broken. "Grief doesn't follow a timeline. Sophia, sometimes our hearts need more time to heal than we think they should." Grace smoothed Sophia's hair. "But I want you to know something important. Having these dreams doesn't mean you're broken. It means you loved your mom so much that losing her left a mark on your heart." Sophia pulled back to look at Grace with red-rimmed eyes. "Really? Really? And you know what? I think your mom would be so proud of how brave you've been, coming to find me when you were scared, instead of staying alone. That was very smart and very brave." They sat together in comfortable silence until Javier's footsteps could be heard, hurrying up the guest house walkway. He appeared in the doorway, looking frantic, still wearing his business suit but with his tie askew and his hair mussed. "Sophia, thank God. When Mrs. Garcia called and said she had to leave, and then I couldn't find you." He stopped abruptly when he saw them curled together on the couch, Sophia safe in Grace's arms. The relief on his face was obvious. "I had the dream again, Dad," Sophia said quietly, not moving from Grace's embrace. Grace made it better. Javier met Grace's eyes over Sophia's head, and she saw gratitude mixed with something deeper. "I'm so sorry," he said to Grace. "Mrs. Garcia got an emergency call about her grandson. And when I got home and found Sophia's room empty, Javier—" "Stop," Grace interrupted gently. "You don't have to apologize. This is what I'm here for, to be here when Sophia needs someone, and she was incredibly brave coming to find me." Javier moved closer, crouching down beside the couch. "How are you feeling now, mija?" "Better." Grace said the dreams mean I loved Mom a lot, and that Mom would be proud of me for being brave. Sophia finally lifted her head from Grace's shoulder. "Is that true, Dad?" "It's absolutely true," Javier said, his voice thick with emotion. "Mom would be so proud of you, Sophia, and she would be grateful that Grace was here to take care of you when I couldn't be." Sophia seemed to consider this seriously. "Grace, can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart." "Do you think Mom can see us? Like, really see us, not just in our hearts, but actually watching?" Grace glanced at Javier, seeking guidance on how to navigate this deeply personal territory. He nodded slightly. "I think," Grace said carefully, "that love like your mom had for you doesn't just disappear when someone dies. I think it stays with us always, and maybe that means she can see how much your dad loves you and how hard you both are trying to take care of each other. And maybe she can see that you're taking care of us too?" Sophia asked with innocent hope. "Maybe she can," Grace agreed softly. Sophia nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Dad, can Grace come sleep in the house tonight? Not in your room," she added quickly, "but maybe in the guest room next to mine. Sometimes I have the dream more than once." Javier looked to Grace questioningly. "If Grace doesn't mind—" "I don't mind at all," Grace said immediately. "Let me just grab a few things." 20 minutes later, Grace found herself in the guest room of Javier's beautiful home, trying not to think about the fact that Javier was sleeping just down the hall. Sophia had been settled back into her own bed, with promises that Grace would be right next door if needed. A soft knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called softly. Javier appeared in the doorway, carrying 2 steaming mugs. He'd changed out of his business suit into dark pajama pants and a gray t-shirt, and his hair was still slightly mussed. He looked younger somehow, more accessible. "Thought you might want some tea," he said, offering her one of the mugs. Chamomile helps with sleep. Thank you. Grace accepted the mug gratefully. How is she? Sleeping. Finally. Javier settled into the chair by the window, careful to maintain distance. Grace, I can't thank you enough for tonight. When I came home and found her room empty, you don't have to thank me. This is exactly what I signed up for. Grace studied his face in the soft lamplight, noting the lines of exhaustion around his eyes. Javier, how often does she have these nightmares? He was quiet for a long moment. More often than I'd, like usually once or twice a week. The child psychologist says it's normal, but watching her relive that night over and over. He set down his mug. I feel so helpless. You're not helpless. You're there for her every time. You hold her when she's scared. You make her feel safe. That's not helpless, Javier. That's everything. Is it enough, though? Javier looked up at her. Some nights, I wonder if she'd be better off with Isabella's family, with people who knew how to navigate this kind of trauma from the beginning. Grace moved to sit on the edge of the bed, closer to him. Javier, look at me. When he met her eyes, she continued firmly. Sophia doesn't need perfect parents. She needs parents who love her unconditionally and are willing to figure it out as they go. That's you. What if I'm not enough? What if she needs more than I can give her? Then you'll find a way to give her more. You'll get her therapy. You'll learn new coping strategies. You'll surround her with people who love her. Grace leaned forward slightly. But, Javier, you are enough. I've seen you with Hearth, way you listen to her, respect her feelings, make her feel heard and valued. That's the foundation of good parenting. Javier studied her face in the lamplight. How do you do that? Do what? Make everything seem manageable. Make me feel like maybe I'm not completely screwing this up. Grace felt warmth bloom in her chest. Because you're not screwing it up. You're just human. Dealing with an impossible situation and doing the best you can. That's all any of us can do. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. The quiet intimacy of the late hour wrapping around them like a shared secret. Grace was acutely aware of Javier's presence, of the way the lamplight caught the gold flecks in his dark eyes, of how the simple act of sharing tea and conversation felt remarkably like the domestic intimacy she'd always dreamed of. Grace, Javier said quietly, can I ask you something personal? Of course. What made you want to work with children, really? Grace considered the question, surprised by how much she wanted to give him an honest answer. My brother, Tommy. Partly. But also, she paused, choosing her words carefully. I think I've always been drawn to people who are vulnerable but resilient children who are sick or scared or hurting but who still find ways to laugh and hope and trust. There's something pure about that kind of strength. And you see that in Sophia? I see that in both of you. Grace said softly. The way you've both survived something that could have broken you, the way you take care of each other. The way you're both still open to letting new people into your lives despite the risk of more loss. Javier's eyes intensified, and Grace felt the air between them grow charged with unspoken possibilities. Grace, he began, his voice lower than before, I need you to know that having you here's not just about Sophia. You make this house feel. Feel what? Grace's voice was barely above a whisper. Like home again. Like a place where good things might still happen. The admission hung between them, heavy with implications neither was quite ready to explore. Grace felt her heart race as Javier leaned slightly forward, the distance between them shrinking to mere inches. Javier, she breathed. Not sure if she was warning him away or inviting him closer. The spell was broken by Sophia's voice calling from down the hall. Grace, Dad, I think I'm going to be sick. Both adults sprang into action immediately, the moment of potential intimacy forgotten in the face of Sophia's need. They found her sitting up in bed, looking pale and shaky. It's okay, sweetheart, Grace said automatically, shifting into professional mode as she felt Sophia's forehead for fever. Sometimes when we've been really upset, our bodies react afterward. Let's get you to the bathroom. Javier hovered anxiously as Grace guided Sophia through what turned out to be a mild bout of nausea brought on by stress and exhaustion. With the efficiency of someone who'd handled countless similar situations, Grace got Sophia cleaned up, gave her small sips of water, and settled her back into bed with a cool cloth for her forehead. Better? Grace asked, smoothing Sophia's hair back from her face. Better. Thank you. Sophia's eyes were heavy with approaching sleep. Grace, will you stay until I fall asleep again? Of course. Grace settled into the chair beside Sophia's bed, prepared to keep vigil for as long as necessary. Javier lingered in the doorway, watching this woman who'd seamlessly stepped into the role of caregiver for his daughter, who'd handled Sophia's crisis with competence and compassion. Dad. Sophia's sleepy voice drew his attention. I'm glad Grace is here. She makes everything feel safer. Javier met Grace's eyes across the dimly lit room, and in that moment he knew with absolute certainty that Sophia wasn't the only one who felt safer with Grace Thompson in their lives. Me too, mija, he said softly. Me too. Grace stayed in that chair until Sophia's breathing evened out into the deep rhythm of peaceful sleep, until Javier had checked on them one final time and reluctantly retreated to his own room, until the house settled into the quiet hush of the early morning hours. As she finally made her way back to the guest room, Grace reflected on the evening's events. She'd comforted a traumatized child, provided medical care, navigated complex emotional territory, and somehow found herself falling deeper into the complicated dynamics of the Morales family. But more than that, she'd felt useful again, needed, like she had a purpose beyond just surviving her own heartbreak. And in those charged moments with Javier, she'd felt something else entirely, the flutter of possibility, the dangerous warmth of mutual attraction, the sense that maybe, just maybe, they were all healing each other. As Grace drifted off to sleep in the guest room of a house that was beginning to feel like home, she thought about Sophia's question from earlier. Could Isabella see them? If she could, Grace hoped she approved of the woman who was slowly, carefully beginning to love her family, because despite all her efforts to maintain professional boundaries, despite the complications and the risks and the sheer impossibility of it all, Grace Thompson was falling in love with Javier Morales and his remarkable daughter. The question was, what was she going to do about it? Chapter 6. Class warfare. Grace was in the kitchen, helping Sophia make chocolate chip cookies, when the doorbell rang with authority. Sophia looked up from the bowl of cookie dough she'd been mixing, her small face immediately clouding. That's Abuela Victoria, Sophia whispered. She doesn't like messes. Grace glanced down at Sophia, who was indeed spectacularly messiflower in her dark hair, chocolate smudges on her cheeks, and felt protective irritation. Any grandmother should be delighted to find her granddaughter happily baking. Well, we're making cookies, Grace said firmly. There's supposed to be mess involved. Javier appeared in the kitchen doorway, his expression tense. He'd clearly rushed home from the office. His tie was loose, his usually perfect hair disheveled. Victoria's here, he announced. She called 20 minutes ago, saying she needed to discuss Sophia's summer camp applications. Sophia immediately started wiping her hands on her apron, her joy evaporating. Should I go wash my face? Absolutely not, Grace said before Javier could respond. You're beautiful, exactly as you are. Sophia nodded and went to greet her grandmother, leaving Grace and Javier alone in the flour-dusted kitchen. Grace could hear voices from the foyer, Sophia's bright greeting, and a woman's cooler response. She doesn't know you're here yet, Javier said quietly. Victoria, she's going to have opinions. About me specifically, or about you having any woman around Sophia, both. Victoria believes Sophia needs influences from their social circle. Javier moved to stand beside Grace. She's not malicious, Grace. She's just protective of Isabella's memory in ways that don't always make sense. Grace felt a familiar chill, the same feeling she'd had when Margaret Caldwell had cornered her in the bridal suite. And I'm not suitable. Grace, your Javier began, but his words were cut off by approaching footsteps. Sophia, darling, you're covered in... What is this? Victoria Reyes entered the kitchen with measured steps, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, her designer suit immaculate. She was a handsome woman in her early 60s, with Isabella's bone structure but tired eyes that spoke of her own grief. Her pale blue eyes swept the kitchen, taking in the baking supplies scattered across the countertop, and finally landing on Grace with obvious surprise. Victoria, Javier said, his voice carefully neutral. I'd like you to meet Grace Thompson. Grace, this is Isabella's mother, Victoria. Abuela, this is Grace, Sophia announced, apparently oblivious to the tension. She's teaching me to make cookies from scratch, and she knows all about medicine, and she reads stories." Victoria's expression flickered, not with malice, but with something that looked like pain. "How nice. And Miss Thompson? You're Sophia's nanny?" Grace supplied, stepping forward with a professional smile. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Reyes. It's Reyes Morales, actually. I kept both names after my husband passed." Victoria's tone was formal but not unkind. "Javier, I thought we'd discussed finding Sophia someone from the Whitmore Academy Placement Service." "Grace is perfectly qualified," Javier said, his tone growing protective. "She's a pediatric nurse with excellent references." "Anurse." Victoria seemed to process this information. "That's practical, I suppose. Though I do worry about Sophia's social development. The children in our circle Sophia is developing just fine," Grace said gently but firmly. "She's intelligent, kind, and remarkably resilient for someone who's been through what she has." Victoria's eyes sharpened. "And what exactly do you think she's been through, Miss Thompson?" Grace felt the weight of the question. This was a test, but not the kind she'd expected. This wasn't about social status. This was about whether Grace truly understood Sophia's grief. "She's lost her mother," Grace said simply, "the most important person in her world, and she's trying to figure out how to be happy again without feeling like she's betraying that love." For the first time since entering the kitchen, Victoria's composure cracked slightly. "Yes," she said quietly, "that's exactly right." Sophia, who had been watching this exchange with the careful attention of a child who'd learned to read adult emotions, suddenly stepped closer to Grace. "Abuela, Grace helps me with my bad dreams. She doesn't try to make them go away. She just sits with me until they're not so scary anymore." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. She quickly blinked away. "Your mother used to do that for you too." "I know. Grace says it's okay to still miss Mom, even when I'm happy about other things." The kitchen fell silent except for the soft ticking of the wall clock. Victoria studied Grace with new interest, as if seeing her for the first time. "Miss Thompson," Victoria said finally, "might I ask about your background, your family?" Here it came, the interrogation that would expose Grace's working-class roots, her student loans, her complete lack of the kind of pedigree Victoria clearly valued. "I grew up in Tacoma," Grace said evenly. "My father was a mechanic. My mother worked in medical administration. I put myself through nursing school with scholarships and part-time jobs." "And your recent circumstances?" "Javier mentioned you'd had some personal difficulties." Grace felt Javier tense beside her, ready to intervene, but she held up a subtle hand. "My fiancé left me at the altar 3 weeks ago," Grace said quietly. "His family decided I wasn't suitable for their social standing. I understand if you have similar concerns." Victoria was quiet for a long moment, her eyes moving between Grace and Sophia, who was still standing protectively close to Grace's side. "Sophia," Victoria said finally, "why don't you show me these cookies you're making? They smell wonderful." Sophia beamed and launched into an enthusiastic explanation of their baking process, complete with detailed descriptions of measuring techniques and the importance of not overmixing the dough. As she chatted, Victoria listened with the kind of focused attention that suggested she was starved for these ordinary moments with her granddaughter. "You know," Victoria said, when Sophia paused for breath, "your mother was terrible at baking. She once tried to make cupcakes for your father's birthday and forgot to add flour. We ended up with chocolate soup." Sophia giggled. "Really? Really?" But she kept trying anyway because she said the best gifts came from effort, not perfection. Grace watched this interaction with growing understanding. Victoria wasn't a villain, she was a grieving mother trying to hold on to her daughter through her granddaughter, terrified that anyone new in Sophia's life might somehow diminish Isabella's memory. "Mrs. Reyes Morales," Grace said gently, "would you like to help us finish these cookies? Sophia's been telling me about how much she misses baking with family." Victoria looked startled by the invitation. I'm not really dressed for. We have aprons," Sophia said eagerly, "and Grace says the best cookies come from messy hands." For a moment, Victoria hesitated. Then slowly, she removed her designer jacket and accepted the apron Sophia offered. The next hour was a revelation. As they worked together measuring, mixing, rolling dough, tension in the kitchen gradually dissolved. Victoria shared stories about Isabella's childhood, about failed baking experiments and kitchen disasters that had them all laughing. Sophia basked in the attention from both women, delighted to have her grandmother participating in the domestic chaos she clearly loved. "Miss Thompson," Victoria said as they waited for the cookies to bake, "might I speak with you privately?" Grace nodded, following Victoria out to the garden while Javier stayed with Sophia to watch their creations through the oven door. "I owe you an apology," Victoria said without preamble. "I came here today, prepared to dislike you, to find fault with Javier's choice." "I understand. You're protecting Sophia." "I'm protecting Isabella's memory," Victoria corrected gently. "But watching you with Sophia just now, you're not trying to replace her mother. You're honoring her memory while still letting Sophia move forward." Grace felt relief flood through her. "That's all I've ever wanted to do." "I still have concerns," Victoria continued. "Not about your character that's clearly beyond question, but about the complications your presence might create. Javier is vulnerable, and wealthy men in vulnerable positions often make choices they later regret." "Mrs. Reyes Morales, I'm not interested in Javier's money. I'm here for Sophia. I believe you. But feelings have a way of developing whether we intend them to or not." Victoria's eyes were kind, but knowing, and when they do, Sophia will be caught in the middle. Before Grace could respond, Javier appeared in the garden doorway. "The cookies are ready," he said, his eyes moving between the two women with obvious concern. Victoria smiled, the first genuine smile Grace had seen from her. "Then we'd better go before Sophia eats them all herself." As they headed back inside, Victoria touched Grace's arm gently. "You're good for her, Miss Thompson. For Sophia. Just be careful with her heart and with her father's. They've both been broken enough." Inside, Sophia was practically bouncing with excitement over the perfect golden brown cookies cooling on the rack. "Look! They're beautiful. Abuela, you have to try one." As they sat around the kitchen table, sharing warm cookies and cold milk, Grace realized that this hadn't been a battle at all. It had been a negotiation, one that she seemed to have passed, at least for now. But Victoria's warning echoed in her mind. Be careful with their hearts. They've both been broken enough. The problem was, Grace's own heart was becoming dangerously involved too, and she wasn't sure any of them could protect themselves from what was already beginning to feel inevitable. When Victoria finally left, she hugged Sophia tightly and shook Grace's hand with genuine warmth. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for taking such good care of them both." After her car disappeared down the driveway, Javier turned to Grace with wonder in his eyes. "How did you do that? I've never seen Victoria warm up to anyone so quickly." Grace smiled, watching Sophia carefully package cookies to save for later. "I think she just needed to see that loving Sophia more doesn't mean loving Isabella less." Javier stepped closer, his voice dropping to that intimate tone that made her pulse quicken. "Grace, about what she said earlier. About complications." "Dad, Grace," Sophia called from the kitchen. "Can we make dinner together too? All three of us?" Javier and Grace exchanged a look, full of unspoken possibilities and dangerous territory. Neither was quite ready to navigate. "All three of us," Javier agreed, his eyes never leaving Grace's face. "That sounds perfect." As they headed back inside to start dinner preparations, Grace couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted today, not just with Victoria's acceptance, but with the growing sense that they really were becoming a family complicated, imperfect, and beautiful. The question was, what were they going to do about it? Chapter 7. Forbidden Desires. 2 weeks had passed since Victoria's visit, and life in the Morales household had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Grace had proven herself invaluable, not just as Sophia's caregiver, but as someone who brought laughter and warmth back into their home. Javier found himself looking forward to dinner conversations, to Sophia's excited stories about her day, to the sound of Grace's voice reading bedtime stories down the hall. But he also found himself looking forward to Grace herself, the way she smiled when Sophia said something particularly precocious, the way she moved around the kitchen with unconscious grace, the way she looked at him sometimes when she thought he wasn't watching. It was becoming a problem. "Grace," Sophia said on Friday evening as they worked together on her math homework, "why does Dad get that weird look on his face when you're around?" Grace nearly choked on her coffee. "What weird look?" like he's trying to solve a really hard puzzle, but he's happy about it. Sophia's 8-year-old observation was devastatingly accurate, and you get the same look sometimes when you think nobody's watching. Grace felt heat flood her cheeks. Sophia, sweetheart, your dad and I are friends. Sometimes adults think about complicated things, like whether you want to kiss each other. Sophia. Grace's voice came out strangled. What? I'm not stupid. I see how you look at each other during dinner. And yesterday, when Dad thought you were hurt because you made that noise in the kitchen, I stubbed my toe. He ran so fast he almost knocked over Mrs. Garcia. That's not how you run for a friend. Grace stared at Sophia, wondering when 8-year-olds had become so perceptive about adult relationships. Sophia, even if that were true, and I'm not saying it is, it would be very complicated. Why? Because I work for you. Sophia considered this seriously. But if you didn't work for us anymore, then you could date Dad. Sophia, it's not that simple. Could you still live here if you weren't working for us? Like, if you were just Dad's girlfriend? The innocent question hit Grace like a physical blow. She'd been so careful to maintain professional boundaries, but Sophia's matter-of-fact assessment forced her to confront the truth she'd been avoiding. She was falling in love with Javier, and apparently, it was obvious to everyone, including his 8-year-old daughter. Sophia, Grace said carefully, what would you think about that? If your dad and I, if we cared about each other in a different way? Sophia was quiet for a long moment, her pencil tracing patterns on her homework sheet. Would you still take care of me? Always. No matter what happened between your dad and me, I would always want to be part of your life, if you'd let me. And would you try to make me call you Mom? Grace's heart clenched. Never. You have a mom, and she was perfect. I could never replace her, and I would never try to. Sophia nodded solemnly. Then I think it would be okay. Dad's been happier since you came here, and you make really good pancakes. Grace laughed despite the emotional weight of the conversation. High praise indeed. Grace. Sophia's voice was small. Do you think Mom would be okay with it? With Dad loving someone else? The question was asked with such careful vulnerability that Grace felt tears prick her eyes. Sophia, your mom loved your dad so much that she married him and had you with him. I think she would want him to be happy, and I think she would want you to have as many people loving you as possible. Sophia seemed satisfied with this answer. Good. Because I was going to tell Dad he should ask you on a date anyway. Sophia, you absolutely cannot. Grace. Sophia. Javier's voice carried from the kitchen. Could you come here, please? They found Javier standing at the kitchen island with his laptop open, his expression troubled. Mrs. Garcia was nowhere to be seen. She'd left an hour ago to visit her sister. What's wrong? Grace asked immediately. Sophia's school called. There's been some gossip among the parents about our family situation. Javier's jaw was tight with barely controlled anger. Apparently, some people have very strong opinions about our household arrangements. Sophia moved closer to Grace instinctively. What kind of opinions? Javier's eyes met Grace's over Sophia's head, and she saw frustration and protectiveness warring in his expression. Sophia, some people don't understand that families can look different ways. They think it's strange that Grace lives here and takes care of you. But that's stupid, Sophia said with 8-year-old logic. Grace takes good care of me. And she makes you smile more. What's wrong with that? Nothing's wrong with it, mija. But sometimes people talk about things they don't understand. Grace felt a familiar anxiety creeping up her spine. Javier, what exactly are people saying? He was quiet for a long moment, his hands gripping the edge of the kitchen island. That I hired a live-in nanny suspiciously quickly, that you moved into the guest house without proper vetting, that Sophia has become too attached to someone who... He trailed off, glancing at Sophia. Who what, Dad? Javier Sahil, who might not be permanent in our lives. Sophia's expression grew fierce. But Grace is permanent, she promised. I know, sweetheart, but other people don't know that. Grace felt the walls closing in around her. She'd been so careful to maintain professional boundaries, but apparently their growing closeness hadn't gone unnoticed by the Seattle social scene. Maybe I should find somewhere else to live, Grace said quietly. Keep working for you, but live off the property. That might help with the optics. No, Sophia's voice was sharp with panic. You can't leave. What if I have nightmares and you're not here? Sophia, I could still. Grace is not going anywhere, Javier said firmly, his voice carrying absolute authority. This is her home now. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me directly. Sophia nodded with satisfaction, but Grace felt torn between gratitude and worry. Javier's protection meant everything to her, but she couldn't shake the feeling that their growing closeness was putting Sophia at risk of being caught in adult drama. Javier, Grace said carefully, maybe we should talk about this privately. Sophia, why don't you go get ready for your bath? Javier suggested. Grace and I need to discuss some grown-up things. Sophia looked between them with knowing eyes. You're going to talk about whether you like each other, aren't you? Grace felt her cheeks flame. Sophia, it's okay. I already told Grace I think you should ask her on a date. With that devastating observation, Sophia skipped out of the kitchen, leaving two stunned adults in her wake. Javier stared after his daughter, then turned to Grace with something that looked like panic in his eyes. Did she really just give us her blessing to date? Yes, I think she did. Grace, I'm so sorry. I had no idea she was thinking about… Javier, stop. Grace moved closer to him, drawn by his obvious distress. She's not wrong, is she, about the way we look at each other? Javier went very still. Grace, because she's right. I do look at you differently than I should. I think about you when I'm falling asleep. I watch for you to come home from work. When Sophia had that fever last week, and you held her while I took her temperature, all I could think about was how right we looked together, like a real family. The words tumbled out before Grace could stop them, 3 weeks of carefully controlled feelings finally breaking free. Javier stepped closer, his eyes intense. You think I don't know that? You think I don't feel it too? His voice dropped to that intimate tone that made her knees weak. Grace, I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since that first night at the hotel, when you told me about your patients, when you looked at Sophia's picture with such genuine interest. I knew then that you were dangerous to my carefully constructed walls, to my determination to never risk my heart again, to my certainty that I could never love anyone the way I loved Isabella. Grace's breath caught. Javier, I'm falling in love with you, Grace. Maybe I already have fallen, and it terrifies me because I don't know how to do this, how to love someone new without diminishing what I had before. Grace felt tears prick her eyes. You don't have to diminish anything. Love doesn't work that way. It just grows. There's room for both. Is there? Because sometimes when I look at you, I feel guilty for being this happy, like I'm betraying Isabella's memory by moving forward. Javier, look at me. Grace reached up to cover his hands with hers. Isabella loved you. She wanted you to be happy. Do you really think she would want you to spend the rest of your life alone? No, Javier admitted quietly. She used to make me promise that if anything happened to her, I wouldn't shut myself off from love. She said Sophia needed to see what healthy relationships looked like. Then maybe this isn't betrayal. Maybe it's keeping a promise. Javier studied her face in the soft kitchen light, and Grace could see the moment his resolve finally cracked. When he lowered his head toward hers, she didn't pull away. Their first kiss was soft, tentative, full of 3 weeks of suppressed longing and careful restraint finally giving way. When Grace's lips parted under his, Javier deepened the kiss with a reverence that made her feel precious, cherished, absolutely essential to his world. Grace's hands fisted in the fabric of his shirt as she kissed him back with all the pent-up emotion she'd been trying so hard to suppress. He tasted like coffee and possibility, like coming home and taking flight all at once. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, foreheads pressed together in the intimate aftermath of finally giving in to what they'd both been fighting. We shouldn't have done that, Grace whispered, but her hands were still clutching his shirt. We absolutely should have done that, Javier murmured against her lips. We should have done that weeks ago. Javier, I know. It's complicated and scary and potentially disastrous for Sophia. His hand slid up to tangle in her hair. But, Grace, I haven't felt this alive since Isabella died. Sophia hasn't been this happy since before the accident. Maybe that's worth the risk. Grace wanted to argue, wanted to list all the reasons why this was a terrible idea, but the words died on her lips when Sophia's voice rang out from upstairs. Are you two done kissing yet? Because I'm ready for my bedtime story." Both adults sprang apart as if they'd been electrocuted, staring at each other in mortification. "How long has she been listening?" Grace whispered. Knowing Sophia, the entire time, Javier ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "We should probably go talk to her." "What do we say?" "The truth. That we care about each other, that we're going to figure this out together, and that nothing changes how much we both love her." Grace nodded, still feeling shaky from the kiss and its implications. Together, Javier reached for her hand, threading their fingers together as they headed upstairs to face Sophia's inevitable questions and observation. Grace realized that there was no going back now. Whatever happened next, they were in it together, all three of them. Sophia was waiting in her bedroom doorway with a satisfied grin that suggested she'd orchestrated this entire evening. Finally, she said with 8-year-old smugness, "I was starting to think you two were never going to figure it out." Javier and Grace exchanged a look over Sophia's head, part panic, part amusement, part desperate acknowledgement that they were all navigating completely uncharted territory. "Sophia," Javier said carefully, "Grace and I need to talk to you about some things." "About how you're going to be boyfriend and girlfriend now?" Sophia asked hopefully. "About how complicated that might be," Grace corrected gently. Sophia considered this seriously. "Complicated how? Because you work for us?" "That's part of it, yes. So don't work for us anymore. Just be Dad's girlfriend and my—" "What would you be? My stepmom?" The casual way Sophia worked through the logistics was both heartwarming and terrifying. "Sophia, it's not that simple," Javier began. "Why not?" Sophia's logic was relentless. "You like each other. I like both of you, and Mom would want Dad to be happy. What else matters?" Grace felt tears threaten at Sophia's matter-of-fact acceptance of their situation. "Sophia, what if people say mean things about our family? What if they think it's wrong that your dad and I care about each other?" Sophia's expression grew fierce. "Then those people are stupid, and we don't need to care what they think." Javier knelt down to Sophia's level. "Mija, some people might try to cause problems for us, legal problems. They might say that Grace and I being together means I'm not taking good enough care of you. But that's stupid too," Sophia said with perfect 8-year-old logic. "You take better care of me when Grace is here. She makes you happy. And when you're happy, I'm happy. That's good taking care of, not bad." Grace felt her heart crack open at Sophia's innocent wisdom. This little girl had already lost so much, and yet she was brave enough to welcome more love into her life. "Sophia," Grace said softly, "are you sure you're okay with this? With your dad and me being more than friends?" Sophia threw her arms around Grace's waist. "I'm sure. Just promise you won't leave us, okay? Even if things get complicated." Grace hugged Sophia tightly, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. "I promise. No matter what happens, I'm not going anywhere." "Good." Sophia pulled back with satisfaction. "Now, can you read me a story?" All this grown-up talking made me tired. As Grace settled into the familiar routine of bedtime stories, Javier watched from the doorway, marveling at how seamlessly they'd all fallen into this new dynamic. Sophia had given them her blessing. The chemistry between him and Grace was undeniable, and for the first time in 2 years, he felt genuinely hopeful about the future. But even as he listened to Grace's gentle voice reading Charlotte's Web, Javier couldn't shake the feeling that their happiness was fragile, balanced on the edge of forces beyond their control. Tomorrow, they would have to figure out how to navigate this new relationship while protecting Sophia from any fallout. Tonight, though, they were simply a family imperfect, complicated, and brave enough to choose love despite the risks. And that, Javier thought as he watched Grace tuck Sophia into bed, was worth fighting for. Chapter 8. Truth and Consequences. Grace woke to her phone buzzing insistently on the nightstand. The guest house was still bathed in the gray light of early dawn, and she fumbled for the device with sleep-heavy hands, expecting to see Javier's name on the screen. Instead, she found 17 missed calls from an unknown number and a text message that made her blood run cold. "We need to talk. Meet me at Pike Place Market, 9 o'clock a.m. Come alone. Don't ignore me this time. Ethan." Grace sat up in bed, her heart racing as she processed the implications. How had Ethan gotten her number? She'd changed phones completely after the wedding disaster, and only Javier, Sophia's school, and the hospital knew the new number. A second text arrived as she stared at the first. Your boyfriend's assistant was very helpful when I explained I was your concerned ex-fiancé trying to return your belongings. Funny how easy it is to get information when you sound worried about someone. Grace felt sick. Ethan had manipulated Javier's staff into giving him her contact information by playing the concerned ex-fiancé. It was exactly the kind of smooth manipulation she remembered from their relationship. Ethan could charm anyone when he needed something. Her phone buzzed again. I know about your cozy setup with the tech billionaire. This affects both our futures. 9:00 a.m. Grace. Don't make me come find you. The threatening undertone was unmistakable, but it also reeked of desperation rather than real power. Grace stared at the messages, debating whether to ignore them entirely or tell Javier immediately. But what could Javier do except worry? And if Ethan was desperate enough to track down her phone number, he might be desperate enough to cause real problems for the family she'd come to love. Better to handle this herself and be done with it. Grace was still debating when her phone rang. Javier's name appeared on the screen. Morning. Beautiful. His voice was warm and intimate, and despite her anxiety about Ethan's messages, Grace felt herself smile. Good morning. You're up early. Board meeting at 7. I wanted to hear your voice before I had to deal with corporate politics all day. Javier posed. Everything okay? You sound tense. Grace hesitated. She could tell Javier about Ethan's messages, but what would that accomplish besides ruining his day and potentially escalating a situation that might resolve itself? Just didn't sleep well, she said finally. Sophia had a small nightmare around midnight, and I stayed with her until she fell back asleep. She's been having them less frequently since you've been here. You're good for her, Grace. Good for both of us. Grace felt guilt twist in her stomach at the lie, but Ethan's threats felt like something she needed to handle on her own terms. Javier, what time will you be home tonight? Hopefully by 6. Why? Sophia has her presentation on renewable energy today. She's nervous about it. Javier's voice softened. She'll be brilliant. She always is when she talks about something she cares about. He paused. Grace, about last night. Javier, we can't talk about this over the phone. Not with everything that's happening at school. You're right. Tonight, after Sophia goes to bed? Yes. Tonight. After Javier hung up, Grace stared at Ethan's messages for a long moment before making a decision that went against every instinct she possessed. She typed back, Coffee bean on Pine Street. 9:30. You get 15 minutes. The response came immediately. Smart girl. See you soon. 2 hours later, Grace sat in the corner booth of the busy coffee shop, nursing a latte she didn't want and watching the door with the kind of hypervigilance she'd learned from Sophia. When Ethan finally appeared, she almost didn't recognize him. Gone was the polished, confident man who'd charmed his way into her life. This Ethan looked haggard as, expensive clothes wrinkled, his usually perfect hair unkempt, dark circles shadowing his eyes. When he spotted her, his smile held the desperate edge that made Grace's skin crawl. Grace. He slid into the booth across from her without invitation. You look different. Healthier. Happier. What do you want, Ethan? Straight to the point. I always liked that about you. Ethan signaled the barista for coffee, and Grace noticed his hands were shaking slightly. I want to talk about your little domestic arrangement with Seattle's most eligible tech billionaire. There's nothing to talk about. Isn't there? Ethan leaned forward, his voice dropping to an intimate whisper that once would have made her pulse quicken. Now it just made her nauseated. Grace, sweetheart, you're living in his house, caring for his daughter, playing happy family with a man who could buy and sell most of the city. Don't insult my intelligence by pretending it's just professional. How I earn my living is none of your business anymore. Actually, it is. Ethan's mask of charm slipped, revealing something uglier beneath. You see, my family's been doing some research into your new employer. Apparently, Javier Morales has some vulnerabilities regarding his daughter's custody situation. Grace's blood turned to ice. What are you talking about? His late wife's mother has been questioning his judgment, something about his lifestyle choices, affecting his ability to parent effectively. Ethan's smile was cruel now. Imagine how a custody evaluator might react to learning about his inappropriate relationship with the live-in help. "You're threatening me. I'm offering you a solution." Ethan reached across the table, and Grace jerked her hand away before he could touch her. "Come back to me, Grace. We'll elope quietly, somewhere tropical. My family will forget about their objections to your background once we're legally married, and your billionaire will find a more suitable arrangement for his precious daughter." Grace stared at him in disbelief. "You think I would leave Javier and Sofia to come back to you after what you did to me?" "After what I did to protect both of us," Ethan corrected, his voice growing heated. "Grace, you have no idea the pressure my family put on me, the threats about cutting me off, disinheriting me, destroying my career prospects. I was trying to buy us time to find a better solution. By abandoning me at the altar, by preventing a disaster that would have destroyed us both." Ethan's voice rose, drawing glances from other customers. He lowered it again, but the desperation remained. "Grace, they cut me off anyway completely. I have nothing, now no trust fund, no family support, no prospects. But if I bring you back, if I prove I can make the right choice, they'll restore everything." "I see." Grace felt a calm settle over her, the kind of crystalline clarity that came with finally understanding someone's true nature. "This isn't about love or wanting me back. This is about you needing to fix your financial situation. It's about us having a second chance. No, Ethan. It's about you realizing that your mother was wrong about my value, and now you want to cash in on that mistake." Grace stood up, gathering her purse with steady hands. "The answer is no." "Grace. Wait." Ethan grabbed her wrist, his grip tight enough to leave marks. "You don't understand what you're risking. Not until you listen. Let go of me now, or I'll scream loud enough to bring every person in this coffee shop running." Grace's voice was deadly quiet. "And then I'll press charges for assault." Ethan released her immediately, but his expression remained desperate. "Grace, please. I know you think you love him, but you don't understand what it's like to be with someone from that world. The scrutiny, the pressure, the way they'll eventually decide you're not good enough. Like I did. Like they all do, eventually. I'm offering you a way out before that happens, before they destroy you the way they'll try to destroy Morales if his personal life becomes a liability." Grace studied Ethan's face, seeing the fear and selfishness beneath his supposedly altruistic offer. "You know what, Ethan? You're right about one thing. I don't know what it's like to be with someone from Javier's world, but I know what it's like to be with someone who sees me as a liability instead of a treasure, and I'll never settle for that again." She turned to leave, but Ethan's voice stopped her. "You have 48 hours to think about it, Grace. After that, I start making some very strategic phone calls, photos to entertainment blogs, tips to family court investigators, conversations with certain influential members of Seattle society who might be very interested in the billionaire's unconventional childcare arrangements." Grace turned back slowly, and Ethan flinched at the expression on her face. "You listen to me very carefully, Ethan Caldwell," she said, her voice carrying the authority she'd learned from years of dealing with difficult patients and anxious families. "If you do anything at all to hurt Javier or Sofia, I will destroy you. I'll tell every gossip blogger in the city about how you abandoned your fiancé at the altar because your mommy threatened your allowance. I'll make sure every society page knows exactly what kind of man you are. You wouldn't. Try me." Grace smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. "I have nothing left to lose, Ethan, but you're still desperately trying to claw your way back into your family's good graces. Which one of us do you think has more to fear from a public scandal?" For the first time since entering the coffee shop, Ethan looked genuinely uncertain. "Grace." "Goodbye, Ethan. If you contact me again, I'll file a restraining order." Grace walked out of the coffee shop with her head held high, but the moment she reached her car, her hands began to shake. Ethan's threats weren't idle. She could see the desperation in his eyes, the willingness to do whatever it took to restore his financial security. She had to warn Javier, had to tell him about the potential threat to Sofia's custody, about the ways their relationship could be weaponized against them. But as Grace drove back toward the estate, she couldn't shake the fear that this was exactly what people like Victoria had been waiting for: ammunition to prove that Javier's judgment was compromised, that Sofia needed a more stable environment. Maybe Ethan was right about one thing. Maybe people from Javier's world did eventually decide that people like her weren't good enough. But as Grace pulled into the driveway and saw Sophia's face pressed against the kitchen window, watching for her return, she knew she couldn't give up without a fight. This family was worth protecting, worth defending, worth every risk she might have to take. Ethan could bring his threats and his desperate schemes and his society connections. Grace Thompson had something more powerful than any of that she had love worth fighting for, and she had Javier Morales, who'd already proven he was willing to stand up to anyone who threatened their family. Let Ethan do his worst. Grace was done running from fights that mattered. This time, she was standing her ground. Chapter 9. The Choice. Grace found Javier in his study that evening, staring out the window at Elliott Bay, with the kind of intensity that suggested he was seeing something far beyond the water. Sophia was finally asleep after her triumphant presentation about renewable energy. She'd earned a standing ovation from her classmates and glowing praise from her teacher. But the joy of Sophia's success felt overshadowed by the conversation Grace knew she had to have. "Javier," she said softly from the doorway. He turned, and his face lit up at the sight of her in a way that made her heart ache with both love and fear. "There you are. I was just thinking about you. We need to talk." Something in her tone must have warned him, because his expression grew serious immediately. "Come in. Close the door." Grace did as he asked, then moved to stand beside him at the window. For a moment, they stood in comfortable silence, watching the lights of the ferries move across the dark water. "Ethan contacted me today," Grace said finally. Javier went very still. "What did he want?" Grace told him everything: Ethan's manipulation of his assistant to get her phone number, his desperation about his family's money, his threats about exposing their relationship to cause custody problems. Javier listened without interruption, but she could see the anger building in the rigid line of his shoulders, the way his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Son of a bitch," Javier said quietly when she finished. "He's threatening to sabotage Sophia's custody case. He's threatening to provide ammunition to anyone who might want to use our relationship against you. Javier, what if Victoria finds out? What if she decides this proves you're unfit? Let her." Javier turned to face Grace fully, and the fierce determination in his eyes took her breath away. "Grace, I'm done hiding. I'm done pretending that what we have isn't real and beautiful and worth fighting for. But Sophia's custody, Sophia is my daughter, and she belongs with me. No judge in the world is going to take her away because I fell in love with a woman who makes both our lives better." Javier cupped Grace's face gently. "Besides, I have something Ethan doesn't know about." "What?" Javier moved to his desk and pulled out a thick manila folder. "Remember when I told you I had Victoria investigated after she first mentioned custody concerns? My private investigator was very thorough." Grace opened the folder and felt her eyebrows rise. Financial records, gambling receipts, photos of Victoria at various casinos documented evidence of substantial debts. "She's been embezzling from Isabella's Memorial Foundation," Javier explained. "Small amounts over time, but it adds up. She's in debt to some very unsavory people, Grace. The kind who don't accept excuses about cash flow problems. You've been sitting on this? I hoped I wouldn't need to use it. Despite everything, she's Sophia's grandmother, and Sophia loves her." Javier's voice grew heavy. "But if she wants to play hardball about custody, she'll discover that I can play that game better than she can." Grace stared at the documents, feeling a mixture of relief and sadness. "Javier, this will destroy her." She destroyed herself. "I'm just documenting the consequences." Javier took the folder back and locked it in his desk drawer. "Grace, I need you to understand something. I will do whatever it takes to protect my family, and that includes you now." The warmth in his voice made Grace's chest tight with emotion. "Javier." A sharp knock on the study door interrupted her. Javier frowned. It was nearly 10 o'clock, and Mrs. Garcia had gone home hours ago. "Mr. Morales," the voice belonged to Luis, Javier's head of security. "I'm sorry to disturb you, but we have a situation." Javier opened the door immediately. "What's wrong?" "Miss Reyes Morales is here with Sophia. She seems quite distressed, and Sophia appears to have been crying." Grace felt ice form in her veins, but not for the reason she expected. This wasn't kidnapping, This sounded like a grandmother dealing with a crisis. They found Victoria in the foyer, her usually perfect appearance disheveled, her eyes red with what looked like tears. Sophia was beside her, not distressed but protective, holding her grandmother's hand with the fierce loyalty of a child who'd recognized adult pain. "Victoria," Javier said carefully, "what's happened?" "I need to talk to you," Victoria said, her voice shaking. "About Sophia's custody, about my petition." Sophia looked confused. "Abuela picked me up from school today because she wanted to take me somewhere special, but then she got really sad, and she said we needed to come home." Javier knelt down to Sophia's level. "Are you okay, mija? Did anyone hurt you or scare you?" "No, Dad. Abuela just cried a lot and said she needed to fix something she did wrong." Sophia looked between the adults with the careful attention of a child trying to understand grown-up emotions. She said she was sorry for being mean to our family. Grace felt understanding dawn. This wasn't an attack. This was surrender. "Sophia," Javier said gently, "why don't you go get ready for bed? I'll be up to say goodnight in a few minutes, but I want to make sure Abuela is okay." "I'll be fine, darling," Victoria said, her voice thick with emotion. "I just need to talk to your father about some important things." Sophia hugged her grandmother fiercely, then Grace, then her father before reluctantly heading upstairs. Once she was gone, Victoria seemed to crumble. "I filed a custody petition 3 days ago," she said without preamble, "claiming that your relationship with Grace made you an unfit guardian." Javier's jaw tightened, but his voice remained controlled. "I know. My lawyers informed me this morning. I was wrong." The words came out broken, desperate. "Javier, I was so wrong, and I need to withdraw it immediately." Grace stepped forward instinctively. "Victoria, what happened?" "I spent the afternoon with Sophia Ariely, spent time with her, not just the formal visits we usually have." Victoria's tears started fresh. "She talked about you constantly. Grace, about how you help her with nightmares, how you make her father laugh, how you bake cookies and read stories and make her feel safe." She turned to Javier, her voice growing stronger. "She's not confused or traumatized by your relationship. She's thriving because of it. She told me that you've been happier since Grace came, and that when you're happy, she's happy. How could I argue with that kind of wisdom?" Javier felt something loosen in his chest. "Victoria, there's more." Victoria pulled a folded paper from her purse. "Ethan Caldwell contacted me yesterday. He offered to provide information about Grace's background, about her motivations for being here. He painted such an ugly picture of your family situation that I almost believed him." Grace felt sick. "What did he tell you?" "That Grace was a gold digger who was using Sophia to get to Javier, that she was unstable from her recent broken engagement, that Javier was thinking with his heart instead of his head and putting Sophia at risk." Victoria shook her head. "But spending today with Sophia showed me how wrong he was. Grace, that little girl loves you with her whole heart, and more importantly, she trusts you completely." Javier moved closer to Grace, his hand finding hers in a gesture of solidarity. "What did you tell Ethan?" "That if he ever contacted me again, I'd have him arrested for harassment." Victoria's voice carried surprising steel. "And that if he tried to hurt Sophia or this family in any way, he'd have to go through me first." Grace felt tears prick her eyes. "Victoria, thank you." "Don't thank me yet. I need to ask you both something very important." Victoria looked between them seriously. "Are you planning to get married?" Javier and Grace exchanged glances. They'd been together romantically for less than a week, but the question didn't feel premature, it felt inevitable. "Yes," Javier said simply. "When Grace is ready, when the timing is right, yes." "And Grace, are you ready to be Sophia's stepmother, not just her caregiver, but her parent?" Grace thought about Sophia's nightmare last week, about the way the little girl had crawled into her lap seeking comfort, to about homework help and bedtime stories, and the 1,000 small moments that had already made her feel like Sophia's mother in every way that mattered. "I'm ready," she said quietly. "I've been ready for weeks." Victoria nodded with satisfaction. "Then here's what we're going to do. I'm withdrawing my custody petition first thing Monday morning. I'm also going to make some very strategic phone calls to certain members of Seattle society, making it clear that I fully support this family and that anyone who has a problem with it has a problem with me. Javier stared at his mother-in-law in amazement. Victoria, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Isabella would be ashamed of me for what I tried to do. She would want Sophia to be surrounded by love, not caught in adult power struggles. Victoria's voice grew firm. Besides, Ethan Caldwell made one critical mistake when he contacted me. What's that? Grace asked. He underestimated how much I love my granddaughter and how far I'll go to protect her happiness. As Victoria gathered her things to leave, she paused at the door. Javier, the next time you see Ethan, you can tell him that if he ever threatens this family again, he'll discover exactly how much influence the Reyes Morales name still carries in this city. After Victoria left, Javier and Grace stood in the quiet foyer, processing what had just happened. Did Victoria just become our ally? Grace asked in amazement. I think she did. Sophia has a way of changing people's minds about what really matters. Javier pulled Grace into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. Grace, I know this is moving fast, but what I told Victoria about marriage, I meant every word. Grace looked up at him, seeing her own feelings reflected in his dark eyes. So did I. Sophia's going to be over the moon when we tell her. When should we tell her? Javier smiled. Knowing Sophia, she probably already knows. She has an uncanny ability to figure out what the adults in her life are thinking before they do. As if summoned by his words, Sophia's voice drifted down from upstairs. Grace, Dad, are you going to get married now that Abuela said it was okay? Grace and Javier looked at each other and burst into laughter. Yes, mija, Javier called back. We're going to get married. Finally. Sophia's delighted squeal echoed through the house. Can I help plan the wedding? You can help with everything, Grace called back, her heart full to bursting with love for this impossible, wonderful family. As they headed upstairs to officially share their news with Sophia, Javier caught Grace's hand. You know, he said softly, a year ago, I thought my life was over. I thought the best I could hope for was to raise Sophia well and try not to mess her up too badly. And now, Grace asked, tilting her face up to his, now I know that sometimes the best things come from the worst storms, that love doesn't diminish when you share it, it multiplies. Javier stopped at the bottom of the stairs, pulling Grace close. I love you, Grace Thompson. I love you for who you are, for how you love Sophia, for the way you make our house feel like a home again. I love you too, Javier Morales. I love your strength, your devotion to Sophia, the way you make me feel like I'm exactly where I belong. Sophia appeared at the top of the stairs in her pajamas, grinning down at them. Are you two going to keep being mushy? Or are you going to come up here and tell me about my new mom? Grace felt her heart skip at the casual way Sophia said my new mom, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. Maybe, she thought as they climbed the stairs together, family wasn't just about blood or legal documents or perfect circumstances. Maybe family was about showing up for each other, choosing love despite the complications, and building something beautiful from the pieces of your broken hearts. If that was true, then the Morales family was perfect exactly as it was, and exactly as it was becoming. Chapter 10. Storm, Surrender, and Miracles. 6 weeks later, Grace stood in the bridal suite at the Four Seasons, the same hotel where Javier had first offered her sanctuary, adjusting the delicate emerald necklace that had been Isabella's. The September afternoon was perfect, with golden light streaming through the windows and a gentle breeze carrying the scent of the rooftop garden where their ceremony would take place. You look beautiful, Sophia said from behind her, and Grace turned to see her soon-to-be stepdaughter in the doorway, wearing a lavender dress that made her eyes sparkle. Thank you, sweetheart. You look pretty amazing yourself. Grace knelt down to Sophia's level, careful not to wrinkle her simple but elegant ivory dress. Are you ready for this? For us to officially become a family? Sophia threw her arms around Grace's neck. I've been ready forever. Dad's been ready too, even though he kept asking if you were sure you wanted to marry us both. Grace laughed, remembering Javier's endearing nervousness throughout their engagement. Despite Victoria's public support and the swift withdrawal of the custody petition, he'd remained convinced that Grace might change her mind about taking on the complications of his life. Well, I'm very sure, Grace said, smoothing Sophia's carefully styled hair. Are you ready to walk me down the aisle? Yes. And I remembered my lines for the ceremony. Sophia's face grew serious with the weight of her important role. When the minister asks, "Who gives you to marry Dad?" I say, "She gives herself, and for. But we're keeping her forever," Grace finished. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. The ceremony itself was intimate and magical. 30 guests gathered on the hotel's rooftop garden, which had been transformed with white roses and fairy lights that would twinkle like stars once the sun set. Sophia walked Grace down the short aisle with the dignity of a tiny queen, and when Javier saw them approaching, he wiped away tears without any embarrassment. "You're sure about this?" he whispered when Grace reached him, his eyes dancing with joy despite the emotional question. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," Grace whispered back. The ceremony was brief but deeply personal, with vows they'd written themselves and Sophia presenting the rings with ceremonial importance. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Sophia cheered before Javier had even finished kissing his bride. The reception flowed seamlessly into the evening, with dinner and dancing under the fairy lights as Seattle sparkled below them. Grace danced with Javier, with Sophia, with Victoria, who had insisted on a mother-daughter dance, and even with Mrs. Garcia, who had become as much family as employee. But the most perfect moment came during Grace and Javier's first dance as husband and wife, when distant thunder began to rumble overhead, the same sound that had brought them together on that stormy night 9 months ago. "Listen," Grace whispered against Javier's ear as they swayed to the music. "It's thundering." "Full circle," Javier murmured back, spinning her gently under the stars. As the song ended and the thunder grew closer, Grace took Javier's hand and placed it gently over her stomach, where their child was growing safe, loved, and wanted beyond measure. "Javier," she said softly, "I have something to tell you." "Tell me." Grace's eyes sparkled with tears of joy. "Our baby will know he was born from a love that conquered every storm." Javier's eyes went wide with wonder as he realized what she was telling him. Around them, the wedding guests continued to dance and laugh and celebrate. But in that moment, there were only the three of them, Javier, Grace, and the new life they'd created together. "A baby," Javier breathed. "A baby. Due in March?" Sophia appeared beside them, as if summoned, having overheard just enough to understand. "I'm going to be a big sister?" "You're going to be the most amazing big sister," Grace assured her, pulling Sophia into their embrace. "This is the best wedding present ever." Sophia announced loudly enough for half the reception to hear, causing a wave of cheers and congratulations from their guests. As the first drops of rain began to fall gentle this time, a blessing rather than a storm, the three of them held each other close and marveled at the miracle of their family. Victoria appeared with an umbrella and a knowing smile. "Shall we move the party inside before this becomes a real downpour?" But nobody seemed to want to move. Their guests grabbed umbrellas and kept dancing, laughing as the rain grew heavier, celebrating love that was strong enough to weather any storm. Grace looked around at their family blood relatives and chosen family. Old friends and new ones all gathered to celebrate the love that had grown from the ashes of heartbreak, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. She'd lost everything that night at the bus stop 10 months ago, but losing everything had made room for something infinitely better. This man who'd rescued her from the storm and then let her rescue him right back. This little girl who'd taught her that love didn't have to be biological to be real. This new life growing inside her that would complete their circle of love. "You know," Javier said, pulling her closer as the rain fell harder, "I used to think storms were something to survive, something to endure until the sun came out again." "And now?" Grace asked, tilting her face up to catch the raindrops. "Now I know that some storms bring exactly what you need, exactly when you need it." Javier kissed her forehead, then her nose, then her lips with infinite tenderness, "Even if you don't know you need it at the time." Sophia giggled as she tried to catch raindrops on her tongue. "Does this mean my baby brother is going to be born in a storm too?" "Maybe," Grace laughed, "but if he is, we'll be ready for him." "Because we're good at storms now," Sophia said with 8-year-old wisdom. "We know they bring good things." As their wedding guests danced in the rain around them, as thunder rolled overhead like applause from heaven itself, Grace Thompson Morales held her husband and daughter close and knew with absolute certainty that some love stories were written in lightning across the sky, bright and fierce and eternal, illuminating everything they touched. This was one of those love stories, and it was just the beginning. 6 months later, during the worst snowstorm Seattle had seen in decades, Grace gave birth to Diego Javier Morales, in the back of an ambulance, stuck in a snowdrift 2 blocks from the hospital. Javier held her hand while Sophia, who'd insisted on coming along despite the weather, narrated the entire event like a sports announcer. He's coming. He's coming. Oh wow, he's so small. Dad, why are you crying? This is supposed to be happy. And it was happy perfectly, completely, overwhelmingly happy. Because some families are born in sunshine, but the strongest ones are forged in storms. The Morales family had weathered every storm life could throw at them, and they'd come out stronger, more beautiful, and more grateful for the love that bound them together. Rain or shine, they were ready for whatever came next.